So welcome to the 11th episode in a series where I'm trying to make high quality PCBs using a cheap CNC router. So in this episode we'll be continuing on making that UV exposer box that I was making. As you saw, we made this very nice PCB, and in this episode we're going to be making hopefully what is going to be a very nice enclosure for that. So as you saw in that prior episode, I was basing my original concept designs on something like this. It's just a simple box with a fan and a display and some buttons. And I did work up that a little bit further into some additional diagrams. You can see here trying to flush the design out a little bit. In the end, however, most of this, other than the fact that it's a box and it's sort of in this shape, didn't really work out. And that's pretty typical when you're designing this sort of stuff. You have to start somewhere to move to the next point. So this is where we started. So as I sort of moved on, I had that PCB now to work with, so I knew how big that PCB was, and I knew it had to fit somewhere in the enclosure, and I knew I had that CPU fan which I wanted to use. So coming up and flushing that design out a little bit, locating the display and the buttons and the fan, and sort of getting the dimensions of the box and roughly the general layout and the power supply going in here, as you can see. So as I continue to sort of like flush out the design, then I'm coming up with a few more drawings here like this, where you can see I'm sort of coming up with some more concepts for the buttons and how the fan will finish. You can also see here I'm starting to work up the ventilation design, so the air is coming in and pushing it out, and so I'm going to need a few ducts and a ventilation grill as well, power supply, and the main board up here again. I think here is also some sort of like design work that I'm doing which didn't really work out. A few things like how I'm actually going to fit it together. So the idea that I finally came up with is using a combination of 3D printed parts and plywood. And the reason I'm using plywood is because there's a lot of surface area to cover, and so a lot of filament would be used. It's not a great thing. But also there's going to be a bit of temperature in this as well, so I wanted to have something to really keep it physically stable. So I'm thinking that plywood is going to effectively act as a little bit of a backbone, and it sort of adds a little bit to the style as well. So these are my drawings. So for this episode, instead of me actually going through and describing all the design, etc., what I think we're going to do is we're just going to build it. So I've got all the parts ready now, and we're just going to step through and we're building it. And as I'm building it, I'll just explain any of the things that are relevant. And I think you're smart enough to figure it out for yourself, the rest of it. I mean, it's just a box basically with a bunch of bits. So that's how it is. Anyway, let's get into it and see how it comes together. So I've got this top panel already printed out here, printed face down when I printed it. It's pretty much a single piece printed straight off the plate. It's not that complicated, I think. Obviously we have the fan here, which I'm going to mount directly to the plate itself, and you can see that the vent holes are angular to ensure that there's good airflow. Hopefully that will be good enough, but still looking at it from the top, it's not such that the big holes are just exposed here either. We have the window installed already for the LCD display, which is just a bit of double-sided tape for a smartphone screen, so just using a bit of that, I think it's 1.5mm tape, already stuck it in there. And you can see the place where the buttons will go, the light sensor, and these two LEDs. So these LEDs are on the board here for a general status LED, or when the UV light is on, I'll be indicating that it's on using that status LED. And I have a power supply LED, which is probably not that important, but I put it on there anyway. You can see that it's mounted to the board here. So the idea is to actually get it so that it illuminates on the front panel here in a meaningful way. So what I actually did is used a clear resin, and I mixed a little bit of white coloring. At first, inside here, I've got these little pieces, same piece of perspex that I'm using for the glass here. Insert the little pieces of perspex, and then I'm actually putting in a bit of that semi-transparent resin and hardening that up, and then filling the rest of it all up with clear resin so that it effectively acts like a light pipe. Now I could have just filled it all up with the white resin, but actually it becomes too opaque and it's very difficult to balance, and the piping of the light isn't very good. So I found that this is pretty good. I mean, it's not ideal. I still have some, there's a little bubble or something here. I didn't quite get it perfect, but I think it's not too bad. Also, the finish here is just from the glass plate of my Artillery X1, which I normally do. It's not really perfect either, but you can see there's some sort of imperfections on the surface. I could sand it down or treat it, but I think it's okay just to leave it like it is. So the panel, the control panel, actually just will mount onto these studs, and you can see the holes are located with the holes here. The screw for under the buttons, which will give good pressure holding for the buttons, and the bottom two screws and the four screws. Now these screws, I haven't used metal inserts because, well, there's a couple of reasons. I'm not really loving the metal inserts. I mean, they're good and they're good for reusing, but obviously they cost money, and when you install them, they deviate a little bit. Yeah, they're just a bit of a pain overall. So what I've actually done here is for all of these screw holes here, instead of trying to forcefully just screw a M3 screw into there, I've actually used a metal tap. and tap all these holes. And that's something I've done throughout this build here. And I believe that should allow enough reusability of the holes instead of, if you just use like a wood screw or a self-tapping screw, it's just going to make a mess every time you put the screw in. But by pre-tapping these holes, I believe that this PLA is going to be strong enough to hold the form. And from what I've seen so far is that it's quite strong to be able to screw those in and use it that way. Let's stop waffling on. Let's start getting it together. I better remove this plastic here. It's not ASMR if you can't get the bloody plastic off, right? It's like anti-ASMR. Come on. Here we go. Buttons. We need buttons, guys, and there are buttons in their life. And I've printed it in this yellow, which is the same colour that I used for the mini lathe build. For anyone who have watched that, they will have seen this colour before. And printing them face down. And they're pretty simple monolithic shapes. When printing these buttons, it's a real pain. I mean, getting them to perfectly fit in these slots is quite a hassle. So in total, I think I end up adjusting the size little by little, adjusting the stick out, adjusting the fit. Maybe you end up printing 5 or 6 test variations until you get it just right. But that's the way it is. It's not that bad, and the result is really quite good. So we'll just pop those in there. This is all of the screws for the build here, so at the end of this hopefully there's nothing left over. And there's all different lengths, which sort of sucks. I'm going to get this all together and there's going to be some like major disaster. I've got something wrong or something doesn't fit. Okay, that seems to be working pretty good. So I'm using this old CPU fan. I think it came from an AMD Athlon from maybe nearly 20 years ago. Yeah, maybe 20 years. Cool Master. Those Athlon CPUs are really terrible. I remember they used to overheat like a real mother. Anyway, the idea for this is that I have these 2 vent guides here, which will push the air to the outside. So coming in from the top and out from the sides. This original design here has these open slots here, which is obviously not going to be good for what I want to do. So I've tapped a couple of holes in here. That'll allow me to put some plates which I've cut out. So I've cut out a bunch of this wood using the CNC and the laser. So that all looks pretty nice. Stick it on there. That's one. And on this other side here, I have another one like this. What I'm also going to do is I have this slot cut out here, and I'm going to mount the temperature sensor so that it will actually contact with the surface of the UV light. Just going to clamp it there in place. Now I've also got them so they overhang a little bit so that they also sort of locate these vent covers a little bit and also get rid of any gaps that might happen because it's not going to be quite perfectly the right dimensions, I'm sure. It looks like that. Make sure I get this the right way. Sucking in. Should be long enough. The temperature sensor on this side. It's got to go to here. So something like that. So that heatsink is going to mount a little bit in the middle. It's a little bit offset actually because the display unit is actually pushing it all a little bit to one side. It's a bit hard to avoid. So I'm also adding a couple of extra heat sinks with this 3M double-sided tape here. So these ducts, this one here with this slot to avoid that, it's going to sort of sit there, and this one's going to sit there, and the heat sink in the middle. So I've got these heat sinks here which I will tape on here, and that will also just improve the heat dissipation hopefully as well. So I'll stick those on. Seems like it fits okay. So I printed out these 2 side mounts, which is what allows me to mount it to the box. And the reason is because I'm trying to make sure there's no screws visible on the outside, so this was just a way to achieve that. If you look at the front side here, you can see that there's these big gaps here, and the LEDs are here. So the LED distance from here to these edges here is quite far, but it's quite short here. So I really wanted to put some spaces in here to make the overall distance the same all the way around as well. So I've also added this aluminium foil here. I've just used epoxy and laid it on there, but it looks quite nice. Just try to improve some of the reflectivity inside the box. Don't know if that's good or bad, but in the worst case it might reflect some of the heat. So obviously both of them are treated in that way. So let's just bolt them on. That's all done. I think there's not much else I need to do with that. The attentive of you might have noticed that I've also used the Dremel here to cut a little bit out of the bracket here so that I could get the airflow to go and stay low on the way out. Got that the wrong way around, like that. So here is the base unit. I have all of these side panels which I've already printed out, so let me just show you those. So all of these panels here, and I have aluminium foil on the bottom there as well. They all slot in here like that. And obviously I have some more for the other side here. Now I'm going to glue them in, and I'm going to do that off camera because gluing is always stressful for my OCD, and if I'm doing it on camera I will make a mess of it for sure. So for now I'm just going to assemble it without those panels in place, but you know, they just slide in and I'll glue them in. But this piece here, you'll see that it fits inside those extrusions, fills in all the gaps. And I've got these little ledges which I've included into the print. You can see like that, 45-degree ledge here. It's quite small, but it doesn't really matter, it just has to be there. And I've got them already pre-tapped, which was tricky to do considering they're how far away from the end. So this is how it all goes together. Like that, and on the back. Pretty cool, right? The things that I haven't sort of figured out yet is I don't really know how I'm going to mount this in here. Maybe just let it float in there, or a bit of foam around it or something. And I didn't think about a solution for the buzzer either, so that's another mystery. I also have these vent grill covers, and they are designed just to friction fit, hopefully, on there like that. So these covers will screw directly to the side panels, and that's what will hold them in place effectively. Screw them in there with that, with those countersink screws. Alright, and is there anything else here? Yeah, before you come back, I'll also show you this. I also built an extension base. This is the extension base here. Like this. There's too much junk in the way. So it's designed exactly the same way as the main body, but it gives me a bit more distance if I want to expose things that have more height. And the construction is the same, and I'm just connecting it with these little Lego type stubs. So obviously I have these shorter reflective side panels already created, which again I'm going to glue in off camera to relieve my stress. And see, there's holes in the bottom there, and then we get a whole lot more distance to the light if I'm exposing something which has more height, which would be nice. So you probably are asking yourselves how I'm going to fix this lid to the box, and you've probably noticed all the screw holes. So what I printed out is these little thingies, and they've also been screw tapped, and they're designed to hopefully all fit around this perimeter. They've got like a little inset there that allows me to screw them in, and my idea is to glue these directly onto the surface of the board here using epoxy like that. So they'd probably sit something like that, right? So I'll probably glue them lightly first, just get them in place and glue them. And you can see it's got this, like these jagged edges around the outside. And then I'll just put another chunk of epoxy around the outside. Now I need to be careful not to come up this edge here, because if I put on this edge here, obviously the lid's not going to slot in anymore. It's a little bit tricky. And again, something for off camera. And I'm not going to bore you with me screwing these all into the top here or anything like that. I'll bring you back when the gluing's done. Yeah, when the nasty stuff's done. So we moved to another day here. I've got the gluing all done after a bit of clamping or whatever. Now this thing is all together. It's so big I can not get it in the shot here. I made a little bit of a mistake though. I sort of over clamped this one here, and you can see it's got a little bit of a gap, but it's not too bad, I think. I can live with it. That's the problem when you do things for the first time. You only get one chance to make the mistake sometimes, so that's it. Basically I just use super glue to glue everything up here. You can see that looks pretty cool in there, right? So this is just all super glue. On the top here, also super glue for most of it, but thankfully I've got good access underneath here, and you can see where I've glued with epoxy. So a little bit of epoxy underneath in the area first, and then slide it on, and epoxy around the edges, and yeah, that's not going to come off, that's for sure. You can see I had to remove that control panel and stuff here to glue it as well, but that'll only take a second to put back in. So I think now we're ready for final assembly, so let's get on to that. So, the big question, did I manage to get epoxy on this edge here and glue it all together, or some glue in there? Will this lid come off? Oh, it's looking promising. Look at that. Just like that. It's pretty cool, right? I like that. So if you didn't have access from the underside, obviously it's going to be a lot more difficult to use this method, but you could still glue lightly underneath and fix it, and then take the lid off and then do the final glue around the outside. Actually, that's what I was thinking to do originally, and then I realized that I have access, so that makes it easier, but looking pretty good. So what are we going to do? Well, since we've got this here, maybe we'll get the light in there. So that's pretty interesting. Doesn't go in, does it? It's pretty stupid. You usually see this sort of stuff on YouTube videos, that people do this sort of stupid stuff. And of course, it happens to me. Looks like I'll have to pop these screws off and hopefully I can get enough maneuvering to get it in. So we need to get it down past one of these. Nearly there. Looks like it's going to be okay. So the big trick is, the good thing about this is really flexible, so I can just bend this a bit. And these screws are pretty short, so with any luck I'll be able to slip them in there. When in doubt, bend some stuff. We're getting very close. Just like a made one. Couldn't have gone any smoother than that, huh? Well, maybe a little smoother. For a second there, I thought it was going to be a total disaster. You couldn't tell by my cool attitude, right? It's funny, you know, because I spent a lot of time figuring out how to make sure it would slide in from the top, and I was thinking about it, and yeah, being real careful. And then still I managed to miss that these things were going to get in the way. It's pretty impressive if you ask me. So I finally come up with an idea for how to mount this buzzer. So the control panel is going to be on this side here, right? And then we've got this vent here. And I don't want to open another hole in here because it's going to look ugly. So what I think I'll do is I'll drill a hole here. So I think I'll just hot glue it on here. Drill a hole, hot glue it on there. Maybe I should do that now. So before I put these on, I may as well screw down this top. Where'd all the screws go? These screws are not that long, so I don't want to over torque them, otherwise it's going to make them a bit useless. I can get enough torque on there just to make them snug. Give you guys a look at the other side. See? It's like I nearly had a plan, right? I didn't seem to damage the aluminium foil too much. A little bit of a scratch here and there, but seems like it worked out okay. Alright, let's get these ducts on. I wonder if that's cooled down enough. I've already pre-tapped these holes. You'll notice there's a little like ledge here, and this is actually a little 0.6mm piece of PLA that I printed out here to create a spacer or a gap filler, because there's going to be a gap here where this ledge comes up. So obviously the screws wouldn't pull in straight if there was a big gap there. So hopefully this fan unit will fit in the middle here. It's going to be tricky to get this on. It's pretty tight. Look at that. Covers up all the sides there. And there's not really any gaps. God, what an amazing design. So there you can see the exit. The sides. If it focuses. So, these are the little grill covers I've got. And hopefully they will fit, or maybe they won't. I'm a bit nervous about this. I think I made the hole just big enough. Yeah, might need a bit of double-sided glue if they fall out, or maybe it's okay. So I think I got that sorted. It ended up being more of a sequencing issue. The cables were sort of getting wedged under the fan and under here and all that sort of stuff. Originally I thought this was in the way of the board, and so I took it off, but it wasn't, so I have to glue that back on in a minute. So for the next trick is to try and fit this power supply in here somehow, and it looks like these cables are going to be in the way, otherwise it's going to be okay. So I think I'll try and bend these terminals. Yep, pretty tight. But I think it's going to fit. You can see I planned this out really well, right? Or not really at all. Done. It fits, sorta, just. I'll have to take it all apart again now to get the thermal grease on that fan, but it fits. Nice. And I need to glue that thing back on too. That's okay. Oh, I was a bit worried there for a second. Hopefully get it back in there without making a mess. You know, once you've sort of got the layout sorted out, the second one's much easier. Get that back on there. I don't know why the things stick out a little bit. Annoying. And it's done. Plug it in, see if it goes on fire. Check it out, guys. Is that a work of art or what? I wonder if I get the light off, you can see that a bit better. So this is the status light, power light. I can see on the camera it doesn't look that bright. To the naked eye, it's actually pretty bright. And actually I didn't want it too bright because obviously it'd be overpowering and it annoys the hell out of you. It sounds like an excuse, but it's not an excuse. And the fan is whizzing away there quite nicely. Looks very good, right? Look at that. And the auto light sensitivity. So there you have it. The hardware is now all complete. And next up we're going to have to get into writing the software. So the software itself, I'm not actually going to include as a part of the PCB series. I'm going to put it in my You Can Do Arduino series. So if you're interested in that, you can go and check it out there. Other than that, this box will be featuring in future episodes where I'm actually making PCBs, so I'll probably show some of the functionality there. But as I said, if you want to check out the detail, you can go and check it out in the episode where I'm actually building the software itself. And to be deadly honest, as of time of publishing this video, the software isn't even complete. So you're actually seeing things as they're unfolding. But I'm pretty confident whatever I write, it's going to be not too bad. So hopefully be worth watching when we get there. Anyway, as I said, that's enough for this episode. I do hope to see you in the next one. So I'll see you then.